This is a regular meeting of ANC 34G. We meet on the second and fourth Mondays of each month, as it's a holiday. We're very glad to have everyone here. I think we're going to have a bigger crowd come in later as other events are on our agenda. First, we'll introduce the commissioners. I'm Randy Speck. I'm the chair of the commission. I represent ANC 34G03, which is the area basically between Nevada and Nebraska and Broad Branch. Glad to have you tonight. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Madak. I'm 34G04. I have basically from Broad Branch to Utah, Nebraska to roughly Tennyson, and I have Lafayette School Park in my single member district.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Abraham Clamus, and I represent Hawthorne and part of Barnaby Woods for ANC 34G01.
Hello, I'm Chris Frombaludi. I am representing the area bounded by Military, Nebraska, Reno, Nevada, area known as Chevy Chase Heights.
Okay, we have 4 commissioners here tonight. That's a quorum, and we can conduct business. So we have 2 commissioners who are out of the country today, and another commissioner who had another engagement, and I expect her to be here. Shanda Garfield should be here probably after 8. But we can begin tonight. The first thing to do is adopt our agenda. There's one additional item that has come up just within the last couple of days that I'd like to add at the end of the agenda. And that is a proposed change in the Freedom of Information Act provisions that is included in the budget bill that the council is considering beginning tomorrow. I think the first vote on the budget is tomorrow. And there's an addition of a provision supposedly clarifying some of the FOIA provisions. And I'd like to consider a resolution at the end of the meeting tonight on that topic. So with that change in the agenda, anyone have any other changes they want to make? All those in favor of adopting the agenda? 4-0. Okay. I have a few announcements, which is the first item on the agenda. The first is with respect to the proposed modifications of the Chevy Chase Pavilion. That's been a topic that's been on our community listserv a good bit lately, and some residents have suggested that the commission should participate in that zoning commission's proceeding, considering the application to modify the planned unit developments, often known as a PUD, for the Chevy Chase Pavilion, which is the shopping area right at Wisconsin and Western Avenue. The commission wasn't party to the original PUD, which was more than 30 years ago, and the concerns related at that point to the density of the development and particularly to the traffic that it would create in our immediate area. And if anyone's interested in looking at that, the zoning commission's files on their website had it. It was a filing that the ANC made in January of 1986, asking to participate in that proceeding. And the concerns that were expressed 30 years ago really have not materialized, particularly in traffic. It hasn't affected the traffic that significantly in our ANC. Our commission determined not to participate in the current zoning commission proceeding at this time for 3 distinct reasons. First, ANC 3E, which includes the Chevy Chase Pavilion specifically, has thoroughly evaluated pretty complex issues that are raised and has adopted a resolution based on its analysis. And that resolution is on ANC 3E's website. Second, the commission would require extensive research in order to fully appreciate the issues involved, and that would require our getting into a lot of detail and getting a lot of people to come to our meetings and describe the issues to us. The third concern was the commission determined that it needed to concentrate on time-sensitive issues that arise in and more closely related to our ANC and its constituents, and specifically related to the traffic around Lafayette Elementary School, and the route of the E6 bus. As you recall, those were pressing issues at the time when this all came up. There are many issues that arise outside our ANC's boundaries that interest some of our constituents, and we encourage residents to provide feedback on on what is important to them. And certainly if residents have an interest in a particular issue, we'll put it on the agenda. The Commission does not have time or resources, however, to address every potential topic and must determine which affect our residents and the district as a whole most significantly. And in this case, we deferred to ANC 3E to handle that issue. The second announcement I have tonight is with regard to the 2020, FY 2020 budget recommendations that are now being considered by the Council. As you may recall, our ANC submitted testimony in a number of the budget hearings. I think we had a total of about 8 different budget hearings that we testified in. And several of our recommendations were specifically addressed in the committee reports that came out of those hearings. For instance, the Committee on Facilities and Procurement specifically adopted our recommendation that the Office of the Advisory Neighborhood Commissions be given an additional $100,000 in its budget to procure or license mobile technology or software to support commissioners who wish to use such technology to improve outreach and engagement with their residents. We thought this was a really important step so that we could get a two-way dialogue going on between the commissioners and constituents. Although our commission did not recommend an increase in the ANC's allotment, the committee also voted to increase all ANC allotments for FY 2020 from the current $678,000 to about $800,000. If this recommendation is in the final bill, budget bill, it will mean that our ANC will receive about $2,800 more annually. And finally, the committee recommended an additional $30,000 to provide communication access for ANCs for the remainder of fiscal year 2019, and an additional $80,000 for next fiscal year to provide sign language interpreters as they're needed at ANC meetings. And so I just want to reiterate what we've said in the past, that if anyone has a need for a sign language interpreter, please let us know in advance, and we have the funds now through the ANC office to provide that. The Committee on Transportation and the Environment also addressed some of the issues that we were concerned about, specifically one with regard to the Clean Rivers Impervious Area charge. The committee acknowledged our concerns that the mayor's proposal to reduce funding for the CRIAC relief program from $7.5 million to $4 million may not be sufficient to relieve the eligible low-income and nonprofit customers. The committee found that the current rate of relief applications would likely leave some surplus at the end of FY 2019, but it noted that the applications may increase over the rest of this year. The committee proposes to require that the Department of Energy and the Environment provide monthly reports to the council on the rate of applications, and that any surplus funds be carried over from 2019 until 2020, which was also something we recommended. As I mentioned before, I think the Committee of the Whole will have its first vote on the overall budget bill tomorrow. The final announcement I have is with regard to the Chevy Chase Community Association, or Citizens Association. It has its happy hour and an election tomorrow. It's a nice combination, an election and happy hour. They will meet at the Little Beast Bistro Cafe, which is across the street at 5600 Connecticut Avenue at 5:30 to 7:30, and there will be complimentary appetizers, happy hour drinks, and the annual election of officers. A good combination. Everyone's welcome to attend. Okay, Becky, you have an announcement?
Yes. Also tomorrow evening at 6:30, right here at the community center, we're having another Lafayette Park Recreation Center meeting for the design and modernization of the rec center. And also going to be discuss our plans for helping erosion in the park. So anyone interested in those issues, please come. The design is almost finalized. We're getting to the stages where we're going to begin construction, and it might be one of the last times you're going to have an opportunity to put some input into it. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I want to make one announcement. This week, the ANC will be starting to publish a monthly email newsletter. Some of you may have gotten a coming soon message today. If you would like to sign up, you can sign up in the back. You can email me. There will also be a link in the minutes, or you can go to our website. The newsletter will include information about ANC meetings, things that happen here, news from the community, and also resident submissions. So please be on the lookout for that. Like I said, please sign up.
I just wanted to make an announcement about the building permit at 5301, 5303 Connecticut Avenue, which is on Jennifer Street. Those are the two vacant lots that have been looking rather vacant for the last 2 years. And so I got a copy of the drawings. I looked them over. I had two issues, one with the size of the building and one with the number of parking spaces, and I discussed it with the zoning commission, and it turns out that they got a 20% building size increase because they're going to provide 2 affordable housing units in the building, and they're allowed to reduce the number of parking spaces. 5 are required for a building of that size. We're providing 4, and the reason is that one of them is going to be a shared parking space, which means it's a cars to go or something like that. So we'll have to track that they actually make that space a shared space, because that space actually counts as 3 required parking spaces. So stay tuned on 5301.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, we'll have community announcements now, beginning as usual with the mayor's office. Gabrielle?
Good evening, everyone. For those of you who do not know me, I am the Ward 4 liaison in the mayor's office. I represent ANC 4A and 4C, and my partner and I, Keyshawn, share 34G. I do not have a business card yet, though it's been a little while. Hopefully next month will be the month that I have it, but I would just want to take a minute to make sure that all of you have my contact information. So my phone number is 202-603-7182. Again, that's 202-603-7182. And my email address is Gabrielle, that's Gabrielle, .priest, PRIEST 2 @dc.gov. I have just a few announcements to share with you all tonight. After a number of high-profile traffic fatalities this spring and an overall increase in traffic deaths since 2015, Mayor Muriel Bowser unveiled DC's Vision Zero's initiative. A majority of the DC Council is moving to codify ambitious street improvements in the law through a comprehensive bill. Additionally, DC Microtransit is an exciting new ride service available in parts of Northwest and Northeast DC. For just $3, you can travel anywhere within the service zone. You're able to add more riders for only an additional $1. And it's very simple. You can just download the DC Microtransit app for free, and new users get a $5 credit. If you do not wish to download the application, they do also take credit cards and cash, and you can call the service by 202-398-0500. And if you didn't catch that number, I did leave some flyers on the back table that has more information about this. And the hours of operation for this service is Mondays to Thursdays from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and Friday and Saturdays from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. And there is no service on Sundays. Lastly, Mayor Muriel Bowser announced that beginning Monday, April 29th, returning citizens recently released from the Federal Bureau of Prisons, BOP, will be able to access services at the newly opened Ready Center, which stands for Resources to Empower and Develop You. Earlier this year, the mayor opened the Ready Center as a one-stop shop where formerly incarcerated district residents can access critical post-release services such as housing and employment assistance and get connected to educational and healthcare supports and opportunities. Through the Ready Center, returning citizens are also can also obtain vital documents and get connected to programs for substance use disorder and mental health aftercare. The Ready Center will service the BOP population on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. And that is all. It is not in my notes, so I will find that out and I'll make sure that you have that. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. Question?
Just one follow-up. Did you say that was April 29th or May 29th?
April 29th.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
That's already
I think that was when it was announced,
Oh.
when it began. Anthony, you have some announcements?
Yes. I'm going to try to take us through the rest of the month and the beginning of June, so bear with me here. Friday is Bike to Work Day. As a reminder, Bike to Work started in 1956 as a good excuse to get people to try biking to work just once and hopefully start a trend. It seems to be pretty successful. In 2001, there were just a few hundred people who participated in the DC metro area. In 2017, there were 18,700 participants in Bike to Work Day, so they're hoping to experience similar results this Friday. There are a bunch of what they're calling pit stops stationed around the district where you can pick up some swag, get some refreshments, enter a raffle, a whole bunch of stuff. The closest pit stop to here is the Friendship Heights Metro Station. There's another one in front of the Kimpton in Glover Park on Wisconsin Avenue. For more information on just biking in general or Bike to Work Day and the events, visit biketoworkmetrodc.org. You can find, they have a bunch of information on there. Probably can answer all your questions. Moving on, like Commissioner Speck said, the council is holding its first vote on the budget tomorrow. The chairman just circulated a draft budget and committee report sometime around 5:30, so we've had about an hour and a half to look at it. That vote, the first vote is tomorrow, and the second vote on the budget is May 28th. So if there's anything that pings your interest, feel free to email Councilmember Che or any member of the council with your questions, concerns. June 1st is Glover Park Day at the Guy Mason Rec Center that starts at 11 a.m. Councilmember Che will be there. I've been there in the past 3 or so years. It's a lot of fun. I'd encourage you to go. On that same day is the Woodley Park Community Picnic. That's later in the day. It's from 4 to 7 at the Woodley Park Playground on Cortland Place. Now, further ahead, on June 8th is the Capitol Pride Parade. The parade goes from around DuPont Circle to Logan Circle. The route sometimes unexpectedly gets modified, so if you are traveling that day by car, I would check WTOP, Twitter, the Capitol Pride Parade's website to figure out street closures ahead of time. Their website for the Pride Parade and all the Pride events happening from between May and June is capitalpride.org, so that's easy enough. And finally, after 6 years coming to ANC 3-4G twice a month, I have to say tonight is my last meeting. I have taken a position at Department of Transportation and will start there later in the month.
Well,
Thank you.
We ought to give Anthony a big round of applause. You've been a fixture in this, in our meetings, Anthony. We appreciate it.
It's been a long time.
It has been a long time.
I came right at the very tail end of 5233, and that's still kind of percolating.
Okay, any other questions for Anthony? Okay, and Jackson.
Good evening, everyone.
Just 1 second. Anthony, you have a replacement yet? You know who's going to be here?
Not yet, but I will.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Jackson Barnes. I'm here representing Councilmember Todd. So a few updates, as Anthony mentioned, the budget was released just about an hour and a half ago or so. So the council will be voting on that tomorrow, at least the first vote, and Councilmember Todd's looking through the agenda as are the rest of the staff to make sure that priorities like education, transportation, affordable housing, and others remain in the budget. Additionally, this week, Councilmember Todd's going to be hosting the second annual Small Business Forum. Now, it's geared towards small businesses in the ward, but it's certainly welcome to Ward 4 residents. That's going to be this Thursday, May 16th at 9 a.m. And it's going to be at People's Congregational Church on 13th Street. And additionally, the 19th annual Ward 4 Family Fun Day that Councilmember Todd's hosting will be on June 23rd at 2 p.m. And that's going to be at Kingsbury Day School on 14th Street. So I'll be here through the duration of the meeting. Also, I left a copy of our weekly newsletter at the back table, so welcome to grab a copy. And if anyone has a constituent issue, has a need or concern, I'm happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackson. And then I got a note from Donna Nugent, who wanted to make an announcement too. Donna?
Hello everyone, my name is Donna Nugent and I'm a 12th grader currently attending Capital City Public Charter School. And in order to graduate at Capital City, I have to conduct a long-term research project on a topic of my choosing, and the topic that I chose to speak about is climate change and renewable energy. So as a part of my study, I have to create a product, and the product can inform and raise awareness about the issue that I'm talking about. So currently, my friend is passing out my product, which is a pamphlet. So inside the pamphlet, there's some background information like what is climate change, what are the negative effects like increase in natural disasters, sea level rise and air pollution, as well as how does energy use specifically affect climate change. So if you use fossil fuel energy or renewable energy and how it can affect the environment. So inside more, I've created 3 tiers that you can fall under depending on your comfortability or knowledge about the subject and what you can do as a resident in DC to reduce your greenhouse gas footprint. So for the first tier, maybe you can't commit to a lot, so you can do small things, small adjustments to your routine, like using the dishwasher only when it's full, or reduce, reuse, recycle, so recycle your plastics, so less trash end up in the landfills and emit methane. And if you're ready to step it up, you can do things like turn off your appliances when you're not using it, and unplug if you're not using it. So turning off the lights when you're not in the room, or unplugging appliances like your charger if you're not using it anymore. And to seal holes and cracks in your home so the temperature is just right, so you don't have to continue to raise the temperature or lower it. And then you can, if you're already for the cause, you can do things like flipping the fan backwards so that during the winter it will blow hot air instead of cold air. And then if you're really about the cause, you can invest in rooftop solar. So this solution is perfect for a condensed city like Washington, D.C., where we don't have a lot of space for solar panel farms or wind turbine farms. So to maximize the space, you can use rooftop solar panels on your roof to use the sun's energy and turn it into electricity. In the back, you can find my school name and address, as well as my name and email address if you have any more questions. Feel free to contact. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Donna. And I know you've got a fan right up here in the front row. The director of the Department of Energy and Environment who's here tonight, and he's certainly interested in all of those issues. I've heard him talk about this very same issue. Okay, Any other community announcements anyone has? Yes, Jeff.
Just want to add something to what she said. I think in our immediate neighborhood, we have at least 100 solar roofs. I mean, just walking around, that's my guess.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few. I have solar on my roof. And a lot of other people do, I think, in the neighborhood as well. And there are a variety of ways that you can work with others in a coordinated effort to bring solar to your neighborhood. And I've been working for a long time with Solar United Neighbors, which is a very good organization to help organize communities for solar. If anyone wants any more information, I've got I'm sure Tommy could give us a lot of information as well. Okay, we've got a number of renewal of liquor licenses that we have to deal with. I don't know if all of you are familiar with it, but liquor licenses for all establishments that have liquor licenses are renewed every 3 years. And the renewals are all at the same time, basically, for each class of license. And so the ones we're dealing with right now are the restaurant and bar licenses, which are called the Class C license. And so they've all come up at the same time, and we're going to deal with all of them, or a lot of them this evening. We've dealt with some earlier this year. Just so that everyone understands the process, when a business applies for a renewal, it's automatically given from the licensing agency. They give them the new license so that they can continue to operate. But they have to put a placard on their door so that they notify everybody that their license is up for renewal. And then if there are any objections by any of the community or by the ANC, then the licensing board can order a hearing at a later point. Most of these licenses, our licensees are really exceptionally good, and we hardly ever have any concerns whatsoever. And most of them are being renewed on exactly the same terms as previously. And so it's really just a matter of going through and seeing if there are any comments or concerns that the community has about these licenses. And if there are none, then we will vote on it as a commission and decide whether we can support or object to the license renewal. So we're going to go through a number of those now, and we have several of the people, the representatives of those establishments who are with us. And the first is Knollwood, and Paul Bricker, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Knollwood, who's been at our meetings many times before, is here tonight to tell us about their license renewal. And basically just answer any questions, I guess, if anyone has.
Randy and Commissioners, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you about how we serve alcohol at Knollwood. So I haven't been through any of the training, I'm just responsible. So I brought somebody in here who has, his name is Jarvis. He's been with us for 5 years, so I asked him to address any of the questions or concerns that you might have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, everyone. Like my boss said, my name is Jarvis Dombe, and this is my first time here. But I've been with Knollwood for 5 years. So we serve approximately 437 drinks. This includes wine, beer, and mixed drinks. We provide on average 248 complimentary glasses of wine. These are for specific events and other activities in our establishment. And all our managers and supervisors are serve-safe, trained, and certified, including myself. There's one of us at every shift at least, Monday to Sunday. And we continue to have no incidents in our establishment. Everything works perfectly.
So 437 that's how many, it's an average month we serve?
Monthly.
Yeah.
Okay. And all of the conditions that were on the previous application are being renewed? There's not been any changes in hours of service or anything else?
No, no changes.
All right. Any other questions anyone has? Knollwood is a very good neighbor in our community. We're very, very happy to have them there. Okay. I would move in that we support the application for renewal by Knollwood. All those in favor? Second. All those in favor? 4-0. Okay, thank you very much. Paul Jarvis. Okay, the next, I don't see anyone from Little Beast. Not Aaron or Robert is not here. Let's hold that one for a little bit and see if they come later. Bread and chocolate. I know we have a representative from Bread and Chocolate.
Good evening, everyone. This is Hamid. It's the first time I participate. I'm the retail director of the Bread and Chocolate. I run 2 stores, Chevy Chase and application at 23rd Street.
You have to speak just a little louder right now.
Sure. Okay. Bread and Chocolate at Chevy Chase, the same as 23rd Street, has the same liquor license. Nothing has been changed since last year, or last renovation of the license. We here just changed the hours of the operation Monday to Thursday. Instead of 7 p.m., it goes at 5 p.m. Okay.
It's fewer hours rather than more hours.
Yeah. And we have a couple of the bottle of wine because our business based on the breakfast, lunch, and lunch, so we don't have dinner. And I hope that's enough information. Any question?
Anyone have any questions? Alan?
Do they have the same conditions regarding trash and pickup and so forth as the other restaurants in Connecticut and West?
I think so. I believe so. What are your arrangements for trash pickup?
Trash pickup is regarding what arrangement?
Or just normal trash pickup at the restaurant?
I mean the time?
Yeah, how often?
Is the twice a week our trash dumpster, and the once a week is our recycle.
Once a week for recycling, twice a week for lunch.
Yeah. Monday and Friday for the trash, and Monday for the recycling. However, they didn't show up today.
We haven't heard any complaints about that at all. Okay, I would move that we support Bread and Chocolate's application for license renewal. Second. All those in favor? Okay.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Okay, Tony, did I see you back there? Yes, sir. There you go. Haven't seen you in a while,
Hi. All right, geez. My name is Tony Brown, and I'm the proprietor of Macon Bistro. We just celebrated 5 years. So thanks to the community for that. And we're not changing anything with the license that we've had for that time.
Okay.
We do have an ANC agreement.
Right. Right.
Will stay in effect.
Okay, any questions for Tony about that, their operations, their license renewal?
This is Macon Bistro?
Yes. Hard to believe it's been 5 years.
Yeah. That's great here.
Okay, I would move that we support Macon's application for license renewal. All those in favor? Okay, thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
And Tim Walsh. By the way, I'm standing in for Dan Bradfield, who all of these are in his single-member district. He's out of town now, so I'm standing in for him.
Good evening, everybody. Commissioners, how are you? Tim Walsh. I am the owner and operator of The Avenue, which is 5540 Connecticut Avenue. We are just surpassed our first year of business, even though we got the license 2 years ago. Had some construction issues that we worked through diligently, but everything's going great. Trash, we're 6 days a week with trash pickup. We are 4 days a week with recycling. Right now, hours are, we abide by, we're, I think, 1 o'clock during the week, or 12 o'clock during the week, 1 o'clock on the weekends. Right now, sales are great. Thank you for the support. We're about 50-50 food and beverage. But any questions you have, I can answer.
Any questions for Tim? Jeff?
Yes. When are you opening the second restaurant?
That's a very good question. I don't believe it's going to take as long as the Avenue has. We are working on transferring the license right now, but we'd probably be ready to go in the next 3 to 4 weeks. And we're opening, we've since closed Arugula. We did our best to maintain it as a neighborhood Italian. Fortunately, if you do the demographic, we're one of 9 pizza or Italian restaurants, especially some of the newer ones that have popped up, Spiclina, Americano, just a little bit more contemporary, and they just, we just started losing some of the market share. We own a seafood catering company that we are now bringing or housing in the brick and mortar, and it's going to be Capital Crab and Seafood. We will be a seafood house. Seasonally, we have crabs. We're in crab season right now. We will be pushing crabs through October, but we will not bring in a blue crab after that. It'll be Alaskan king, snow crab, pushing oysters, mussels, but we're keeping the soul of arugula because we will still have fresh pasta. So lobster ravioli, the linguine, mussels and clams. So we're still going to draw from that arugula menu. We're keeping the staff, things like that.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
Yes, Alan.
Will that be a new license, or will you take over Arugula's?
It's Arugula's license.
Okay, you're buying their license in effect.
Yeah, so we own it. The LLC owns it. It's just changing, doing business as Arugula to changing doing business as Capital Crab and Seafood.
Okay, I would move again that we support the application for the Avenue's renewal of its liquor license. All those in favor? 4-0, okay. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it. All right, we'll defer for a while, still further Little Beast Bistro. Okay, our next item on the agenda is the next item on the agenda is something that's again come up as a result of the budget proceedings at council, and this involves the replacement of lead service lines from DC Water's main service to the house. And I'll let Valerie Barron and Vince Morris talk about that. Valerie, I met both Valerie and Vince through the DC Water Strategic Alliance that they've created. And this has given us an opportunity to talk to a lot of people all over the city who are involved in similar kinds of issues that we're interested in as well. So Valerie and Vince.
So I'll keep this very short. My name is Vincent Morris. I work for DC Water in the External Affairs Department. So I do a lot of outreach in the community and with media and local government. I came here because Randy, I've been impressed. He's probably one of the most active ANC members in the city, and a tremendous addition to the Stakeholder Alliance, a group of residents who advise DC Water and our general manager on issues of general concern to the authority. So when he asked me to come, I said I would gladly be here. I didn't know that Tommy would be here. Tommy knows more about water than I do. He could easily say anything I'm going to, but he has his own agenda. So I'll just speak quickly. I'll talk a little bit about the bill. Whenever I'm out in the community, I basically start by giving people a reminder of what DC Water is, just because sometimes people have moved here recently or haven't paid attention to it. DC Water, we're part of the government. We're unlike other utilities in that we are not here to make a profit. We are here just to provide a service. DC Water consists of basically 2 big functions. I call it like our 2 kids. We have water and we have wastewater. So So all the water you drink, or shower with, or wash vegetables, or water your lawn, we provide that, and we try to do it at low cost and as reliably as possible. And then we treat all the water. We treat everything that you flush down the toilet or everything that goes down the sink, every hotel, Capital Water Arena, all that water goes to the plant. So we treat that and try to make it cleaner than when you pull it in at Great Falls, Little Falls. The third child, the third big project we have is Clean Rivers. And the Clean Rivers project grew out of a lawsuit to try and clean up the Potomac River, the Anacostia River, and Rock Creek. And that takes us to where we are now, which is paying for that is a fee that's assessed on each customer's bill every month based on impervious area. And that has become a great source of frustration for some, although the results of the project, the underground tunneling system, are fantastic, and I'm happy to share information with anybody who wants more information about that. We put it on our website, and we try to talk about it quite broadly. Apart from those major initiatives and efforts that we put our attention to every day, in DC we have tens of thousands of homes that still have lead service lines. Now your service lines are the small 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch pipe that runs from the street to your house. In some neighborhoods, here in Ward 6 and Ward 1, really in all parts of the city, those can be made of lead. And the way the law is set up, DC Water does not replace the lead service lines on your property. If you own the house, you are responsible for that line. There is a portion of that line that stretches from where the boundary is between private and public property and out into the street. And that is DC Water's responsibility. Now, for years, what we've done is when we're improving infrastructure in the neighborhood, tearing up distribution.
Talk into the microphone.
Oh, okay, sorry. When we're bringing up old distribution lines, we will try to replace all the lead service lines. But a lot of times, people who live in the home might feel like they've been using that water for years and have no elevated lead risk. They may not have the money, or they may not have the inclination, or maybe they're traveling. So there's a number of reasons why it doesn't get done. The council this year, thanks to Anthony's boss and Jackson's boss, the council voted unanimously to change that, to set aside a program that has two pieces that would make it easier for customers who are low income or moderate income to have that cost paid for. And then in certain cases, if DC Water has not replaced the distribution line on a street, and we're going to do that entire street, the city would pay the full cost for every house on that street, regardless of income. So it's going to be it is a really great step forward in terms of reducing the overall number of lead service lines in the city. That law passed, or that legislation passed last December, and it's gone into effect now. There has been some discussion about how much money should be put towards that. I am not wading into that issue. Our position at the authority is we absolutely support any effort to remove lead service lines, but we have not inserted ourselves into the discussion about the appropriate level of funding. That's a discussion between the council and the mayor. So with that, I'm happy to take questions, but Valerie, who Randy invited as well, can speak more knowledgeably about kind of where things are right now. So I'll just stand by, Randy.
Why don't we do that, go ahead and go from Valerie and then back questions after that.
Hi, so I'm Valerie Barron, and I am a member of the Stakeholder Alliance with Commissioner Speck, and I'm also a staff attorney at an environmental and public health organization called the Natural Resources Defense Council. But I'm having a little bit of a mix of fond memories and PTSD because I was also an ANC commissioner when this came to my attention. I was not just an ANC commissioner, I was a very, very pregnant ANC commissioner. And I waddled into the meeting, and DC Water came to present some plans for infrastructure upgrades in my ANC, in 1A, where I live in Columbia Heights. And at the time, my colleagues at NRDC were litigating the case in Flint. So that was my group, and I was getting a firsthand education in what practices with lead pipes are safe and what practices with lead pipes are dangerous. And one thing that happens when you only replace part of a service line is that there are two things that happen that are relevant. One is you do this construction and it shakes up the pipe. And these bits of lead that have settled onto the bottom for a very long time, they flake up into the water, and this can be very high levels of lead. The other thing that happens is, if you can remember way back to high school chemistry, when you fuse two different pieces of metal together, two different kinds of metal together, a chemical reaction happens. And over the long run, that chemical reaction causes lead to get into the water. So when we have a practice called partial lead service line replacement, which is what Vince just described and what DC Water described in my ANC meeting, you're getting very high levels of lead around the time of construction, and then far into the future, lead that's beyond just the lead that leaches from the pipe actually gets into the water, and this practice elevates lead in the water beyond what not replacing any of the pipe would do. So does anyone in here remember the lead crisis in DC about 20 years ago? A lot of people think that our lead problems in the district are behind us. But one problem, and the District Office of Inspector General just found that this is still a major problem, comes from partial lead service line replacement. We're paying as ratepayers to upgrade infrastructure that then is going to need an additional fix. So in my block, for example, nearly all of the homes on my block have partial lead service lines. In 2005, ratepayers paid for the water main to be upgraded. But in order for the water to be safe, someone has to pay to do construction again to go back and fix this. So what this bill would do, if it's funded properly, is it would enable DC Water to stop doing this practice. We can fix the infrastructure in a way that's durable and a way that's safe, and a way that doesn't require us to go back and spend funds in the future to fix it, and most importantly, in a way that gets lead out of the water. And I mentioned that when this came to my attention, I was very, very pregnant ANC commissioner, but what I didn't mention, and that not everyone knows, is that there's no safe level of lead. We used to think that minimal exposure was okay, but the science has come a long way and it's very definitive. Even tiny amounts of lead can cause extreme problems in developing brains, but also in healthy adults. I would love to have a discussion about this, strongly support this bill and funding it. $1 million, which I believe, just got it on my phone, is in the budget that's being looked at tomorrow. $1 million would be enough to stop creating new problems. Funds beyond that would actually be enough to go back and start to fix these past errors and clean up the water in the district. I wrote a blog about this on Greater Washington today. I brought some copies if anybody's interested. I'm happy to chat. Really appreciate taking the time to talk with us and put a resolution together. And I encourage folks to reach out to their council members.
Do we have any data from the district on the level of lead in the water currently? What level that is? My other question to you is what's, and maybe you don't know this now, but how is the rollout going to be prioritized so that we should ensure that communities are most affected are prioritized? So
Vince may want to weigh in on one or both of these questions, but the district OIG report did find some challenges with how samples are being collected. Anyone in the district can get a free lead test. There's a map, you can go online, and sometimes you can see if your house has a full or partial lead service line. Mine is blank. I can't see from my house what I have. My lead level came back as 0. I still filter my water. Everyone I know who works on drinking water filters with a filter that's certified for lead removal. And as you may know, every child in the district does get a blood lead test. But those are sort of snapshots in time when it's the overall picture, both in what's in your water and what's in your blood, that matters most.
And Valerie, I think the Inspector General's report that I read indicated that they really don't have a very good handle on where the lead lines are.
79% of the, it was 79% were unidentified.
Right. So
I understand there's some plans in the works to upgrade that data.
That's an important aspect of this too, is to identify where the lead lines are.
To identify where the hazards are and let people know that they really need to be filtering their water.
Thank you so much for coming on. I just had 2 questions. So I want to make sure I understand. The large pipe is under the sidewalk, or is under the street. DC Water currently replaces as construction is done on the street or according to the plan.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there's a smaller pipe that comes to essentially the yard, and then there's a personal or private property pipe that comes, pictures.
We like to say that it's a pipe that runs through public property and runs through private property, because we actually have a little disagreement about the legal authority to address this, so that is way too far in the weeds for this meeting. If you think of it this way, there's a pipe that runs under and parallel to the street,
Right.
and those are usually too big in diameter to even support a lead pipe.
Right.
Lead collapses on itself beyond like a 2.5-inch diameter. So those are the water mains, and then perpendicular to that, there's the pipe that brings the water to your house. Those are the ones, that's the service line, and those are small and often made of lead.
Got it. And so this $1 million would be funding to replace the service line, which is currently not being replaced.
Currently, the service line that runs, we can consider it from the water main under the street to the sidewalk. They're taking care of that. Ratepayers are taking care of that. That runs through public property. The part that runs through private property from the sidewalk to the house, that's the one where it's been a pretty low rate of replacement because people have to pay out of pocket on relatively short notice. And that's what the $1 million a year would take care of.
Thank you for clarifying that. I actually see that I'm looking at the recommendations right now for tomorrow's discussion, and there is $1 million in there.
Yes.
It says something like it partially funds this bill.
Yeah.
What is the other funding that you're seeing?
The other funding would be to support people that the relatively low income folks that want to go back and fix a past partial. So there are two problems. We need to stop creating issues by doing partial lead service line replacements, but then we also have to go back, find all of the ones that we did, and start to fix the problem, and that's what the additional funds would go for. So we're hoping that next year we can start to fund that program, but this year, just stopping partials would be a really great step in the right direction.
Just one question for the commission. In our resolution, forgive me if I just do we have anything about funding for the future?
We only indicate that it is recurring, and that's the language that's in the statute, is that it would be recurring. They can't really, I don't think, commit for the next year, beyond fiscal year 2020. All they can say is that this would be recurring year after year, beginning with 2020.
What's the funding level that you'd like to see?
I'd like to see full funding. The $1 million, it's definitely the council has prioritized the right way. This is the right way to start the program. The additional the fiscal impact statement had $5.2 million a year, but the way that they came up with that is they divided the total number of estimated lead service lines that would need to be replaced. They basically did it so that we had to replace them all in 4 years. I think it would be great to replace them all in 4 years, but if the funding in future years came in a little bit under, anything to really get it started would be a step in the right direction.
Thank you very much.
So I would like to just have some clarification.
Sure.
So you replace the line from the main line to the sidewalk or to the property line?
I like to say sidewalk because it creates a clear image in people's heads that it's really to the property
Because
line.
2/3 of my front yard the city owns, so that makes a big difference.
Yes, I understand.
And then I have something that's
You got it.
something unrelated but not being addressed here or anything, and it might not have any, probably doesn't have any impact, and most people don't think it's as important as humans, but pet owners. Nobody tells me what the lead levels do for pets. I give all my pets filtered water. A lot of people don't even think about it. Are there any studies regarding pets?
That is a great question, and I'd have to look at it myself. My dog might be losing some IQ points. Chair to recognize.
So you said this program to replace the lead line is from the property line to the house. It's only going to be paid for low and moderate income families? Or?
There's two separate programs. So going forward, the $1 million would just, once they're in there, they'll do the whole thing. That's what's most cost efficient. And then there's an assistance program that would go into effect. And I can leave you with a copy of the bill and we can look into that.
So the only reason I ask is that, you know, a lot of the folks up here will not qualify for low and moderate income, so that means the houses in Chevy Chase will stay the way they are. Unless the folks want to pay $5,000 or so to get the lead line replaced in their house.
For past mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just so I clarify this maybe There are houses in our area, though, that may have had the lead lines replaced up to the property line.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, they've already had them replaced. This $1 million would cover that, to repair, to fix that, correct?
No, you're
No,
talking.
it wouldn't cover that.
It's going to cover the money from the city, where the city stopped and where your water main, where it goes into your house.
So in the next year, if they replace any lead lines in our neighborhood, they would replace the whole thing, not just up to the property line.
If it's the whole street, right?
That's right. The whole street would be done. So we have a capital budget that projects based on the age of the distribution lines, how likely they are to fail. If we know how old they are, sort of we prioritize obviously, and also try to look at water mains that if they did collapse would have the greatest impact. So if you live on a cul-de-sac with only 3 houses, that's a smaller priority than a water distribution line that may feed into a hospital or a school. So there's all kinds of factors that we look at, but we have a list of projects that we're going to do in the next fiscal year. So in that year, if we're doing, say, 3 blocks worth of Jennifer Street, every house on that street, when we pull up the distribution line, all those service lines, if there are any that are lead, this bill would pay for the private side. So the individuals on that street, regardless of income, both sides of the street, every address would have their lead service lines at no cost.
You said any that are lead. What if, I think I have copper, according to my plumber, but I don't know for sure because it's underground. But you talked about merging 2 metals, so what would you be replacing the lines with?
If you have copper, it's like we have copper. You don't have, it's not an issue. And in fact, there are fewer lead lines up here than in other parts of the city. You can, even though the lines are underground, you can tell because the pipe enters your house. So if you can't determine it, a plumber can. It's a pretty easy process. There is just a place where the pipe enters your house. Maybe in your basement.
Yeah, he scraped it. He thought it was copper.
So you can look right there, and if it's copper, this does not apply to you.
And you can check the map too. It's likely your house may be listed or part of the line might be listed.
Okay, Jeff?
What kind of pipes connect with apartment buildings, office buildings, shopping centers, or historical sites, like the White House, the Capitol? Does this bill affect those properties as well?
It does not pay for multifamily or bigger, larger properties. It's just, but in most cases, those, because they have larger service lines, they're not made of lead.
Oh, okay.
So it does, in most cases, it wouldn't apply to them anyway, because they're very likely to have a lead service line.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a community advisory group regarding this bill or involved in this process?
Well, there's a community advisory group for DC Water, which Vince could speak to, and Commissioner Speck and I both serve on it. But there's just a coalition of us that have been working on it, and I'd be happy to give you my contact information.
Okay, well, Vince and Valerie, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
What I'm going to do is now propose that we've drafted a resolution supporting the bill that's been introduced in the committee, and then now I guess is going to be as part of the committee of the whole's consideration tomorrow, a resolution supporting that. And so we'll try to get it out to all the council members first thing tomorrow morning, so that they'll have it right away. I'm sure they're going to wait to read it before they vote on this. But I do think it's important, and this is something that it affects the health of all of our citizens in the district. So we ought to be doing this, and we ought to be, as Valerie said, we ought to be doing it more. So I prepared a resolution that urges the council to adopt this recurring funding of $1 million a year beginning in 2020. Is there a second for that? All those in favor? 4-0. Okay, thank you. And Valerie and Vince, thanks again. Really appreciate it. Okay, our next guest tonight is Tommy Wells, who has been a number of things in the District of Columbia, including council member, and now he's the director of the Department of Energy and Environment, and dealing with a lot of the issues that we've been discussing tonight. And I know you wanted to talk specifically about the budget, but we're open to discussing anything you want to talk about.
Well, thank you very much, Randy. Thanks for your service as well, and to the ANC commissioners. Let me go straight into it. The reason I'm here this evening is that the mayor's cabinet spanned out across the city to talk about the budget, and this is obviously would be one of the last meetings that this would occur, because the council has now proposed their budget, and as many of you know, there's been somewhat of a budget brawl already brewing between the mayor and the council through this. And so I'm just going to go over a couple of things that you're going to want to pay attention to. I believe that, all the budget impacts your ward and our citizens. I'll go through a couple of highlights in particular. But the council just dropped, or the chair of the council just dropped the budget, as you know, and you probably know more about it than I do right now with your computer open. I've been trying to say on my phone, like, who's fighting about what happened. It's pretty interesting stuff, actually. And so it starts off as a $15.5 billion budget. It includes some tax increases, but it's an unprecedented investment in affordable housing. In DC, the mayor has proposed, and even up to the day before this budget, we invest more per capita in affordable housing than any other jurisdiction in the country. She proposed $130 million, which is a $30 million increase over last fiscal year. And then $20 million for workforce housing, and then $37 million more for homelessness. Other things in here include $65 million for transit enhancements, in particular to help the Vision Zero improvements around intersections so that we can walk around safely, bike lanes, trails, and then $122 million to create a K Street transit way, so that you take the two service roads away and put a rapid bus down the middle of K Street that operates outside of the cars. A couple of things in particular that'll be important to you as well is that $15.5 million for improvements at the Chevy Chase Community Center, $22 million to reduce overcrowding at Alice Deal, $32.8 million to complete the renovation of Eaton, $20.5 million to reduce overcrowding at Key Elementary, and $20.5 million to reduce overcrowding at Stoddard. So it's that's a large capital budget. In particular, some of the things that I know that I'm concerned about as your director of the Department of Energy and the Environment is that we have to make investments in our buildings. And buildings are 74% of the cause of greenhouse gases in Washington, D.C. We have to reduce the amount of energy our buildings use. And we're good at building good buildings, we're not very good at maintaining them. And just like the railroad, when you need money, you cut maintenance and hope nobody notices for a while, maybe you can make it back up. I know that I think that's one of the things that we all need to be looking at in the budget is what's the maintenance budget for our buildings. DGS, Department of Government Services, maintains this building, our fire stations, our schools, all the important buildings that we rely on. And I really have to say, Mr. Chair, that as I got into this from this perspective, as you know, we built Dunbar High School at the time. It was the most energy efficient high school in the nation, one of the most efficient in the world. Now there's very few funds to even replace the filters in that building. And that's the kind of stuff people don't see, and the efficiency of that building is dropping. So we need to pay attention to the maintenance budget. The mayor put $129 million in there. Last I saw is that the committee has oversight, took $3 million away. I'm not going to say that the mayor's amount was enough, but I certainly know that removing money from the budget, which the council, and I was there too, council believes that most fungible money in DC government is what we call local dollars. Those are the dollars that are just straight tax revenue dollars. They're the most valuable if you have a new initiative and you want to fund it. And so you can look at the maintenance budget. You're not defunding the, say, build the community center. You're not defunding something that you can see. It's the maintenance budget. So I know at least $3 million from the committee was proposed to take there for another purpose. But on the other side, let me say that across the country, in DC too, that our public housing, the federal government has not provided enough maintenance money, and they're way behind in maintenance. And the brawl that I'm watching on Twitter right now was that Events DC, which has a convention center and such, had a reserve, and the council took a bit of that reserve to restore a $30 million tax cut, so that that tax cut is not in place or to refund it, and then $30 million for maintenance and repairs for public housing. The interesting conversation in the council, but you guys, I think, have made a difference, and I appreciate that your ANC prepares testimony, and I always like seeing, whether I agree or not, I like seeing representation from your ANC when I have my own hearings on my budget, and you're fortunate to have folks that really do pay attention to my budget. Along those lines, Randy or Mr. Chair, I can either go into the other questions that you wanted to make most efficient use of my time, so that I answer the other things that from the pre-act charges, or I can take any questions you first.
Go ahead and address those. I did send a few topics that we were particularly interested in, so that Director Wells would be prepared for it. So, well, you can just go ahead and address those.
Proof that ANCs make a difference. That your ANC has been extremely vocal and assertive to say that when the Clean Rivers Impervious Area charge went through, and it's so high that the council and the NDC Water is providing rate relief, that the criteria for nonprofits excluded Knollwood and Ingleside. And it's a new one, it's a technicality in the regulations, but it in fact did. And with very clear support and advocacy from the ANC and from the representatives from Knollwood and Ingleside, that we have amended the regulations. We did it by emergency, and that's in place, and still has to go through the notice of comment, of course, for everyone to do that, but it's in place as an emergency. It'll be retroactive back to the 1st of October. It's retroactive to the 1st of October, like the other rate relief, and it includes Ingleside and Knollwood for relief. And so you should be hearing from us shortly, but however long it takes to get through the bureaucracy to approve, it's still retroactive to when every other nonprofits that's been approved as well.
We really do appreciate that, and I know Knollwood and Ingleside also appreciate it as well.
Well, I know I would not be able to be in another public meeting without you reminding me about it, so hopefully we've got this taken care of. And I also want to note that your council member, Che, has, from the times that we were colleagues in the council, she has my cell phone number, and she sometimes texts me late in the evening wondering what the hell is going on. So you have had great support from your elected officials. So another issue has been the culvert under Broad Branch between 27th Street and Linnean Avenue. The undersized culvert has led to recurring flooding on Broad Branch Road. These types of infrastructure issues are usually addressed by DDOT and DC Water. However, as it was adjacent to a DOEE stream restoration, we decided to do the design and construction using a federal grant, and currently the project's at 65% design. However, DC Water has valid concerns regarding the integrity of the culvert and has recommended lining the culvert to strengthen it, which will require additional funding outside of our budget. So we're working to set up a meeting with DC Water and DDOT in the coming weeks to get a consensus on how to proceed so we can fix that, where the funding will come from, and who will construct the designs we're developing. There is also concern on Oregon Avenue Watershed Green Streets Project, DDOT's project being funded by EPA Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Most of the projects being implemented and will be completed this year. DDOT will notify residents 2 weeks in advance before construction begins anywhere near their homes. It is unfortunate that some of the projects have been eliminated because people are concerned about having the green infrastructure on their streets around their house. And so that's where we're at. Did I cover everything?
Yeah, those issues that I think we had. Any other questions? Any questions about Grand Street? Okay. Becky?
Yeah. So I applaud all the energy efficient things, but we have a little bit of an issue with
with LED lights being too harsh, too blue-white. And I'm wondering why DOEE isn't coming down on the side of being more warm, 2700s, as opposed to what the city's proposing at 3000. Because there's been studies out that 3000 is too blue-white for people, and it affects your circadian rhythms and your health and everything else.
So what the Department of Energy and Environment was asked specifically about is the impact on wildlife. And these are the street lights that we're changing over to LED. Let me assure you, as you may imagine, the cost of it, if you look at all these street lights, is extraordinary. So the cost is a lot cheaper to the citizens. But the question is that the earliest LEDs that came out were very bright white light. And we were asked what would it do to the wild animals and wildlife in the city was the question to us. And our biologists came back and said, you know what, we're in a city and animals are already subjected to so much city light that we can't see that there'd be a measurable difference on animals in the district between what we have. And so the belief is that the change was incremental and probably they did not believe it would be an impact on city wildlife.
So you're only doing
Wildlife, not with the humans?
That's the Department of Health.
Yeah, but energy still affects the humans, right? So, and I don't know what studies they looked at, but I would just from personal experience disagree with that, because when they replaced the street light outside my house, it wasn't even an LED. It was those teardrop ones, and they put a brighter light in. My dogs paced all night long because it was like you could read the paper at 3 a.m. in my front yard.
I did not second guess. I did ask them more than once because of testimony and concerns of citizens. Asked them to go back to a literature search, and both times I got the same answer. But that said, no one's here that can represent DDOT, but I believe DDOT is looking at that there's a new product that is a softer light, is my understanding. And I don't know if they're doing it with a filter or if it's actually a different light. But my understanding is DDOT is working on a softer light because of those concerns.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
I have a question regarding funds towards traffic safety.
Could you speak up?
I have a question towards funds of traffic safety. I'm Ben Cole. I'm an 8th grader at middle school. And for my community service project, I petitioned for speed humps along Chevy Chase Parkway between Military Road and Connecticut Avenue. And I was also wondering about a 4-way stop sign at Chevy Chase Parkway and Military Road, because I know that a lot of accidents have happened there. I asked for a crash report and for 3 years past, and 16 accidents were reported there in the past 3 years. I know that a petition was already asked, it was rejected, and I want to ask for another petition. How would I do that? Like, how would
I think
I can help on that a little bit.
Actually, you would know more about that.
Yeah, we have been working with DDOT about that very intersection. And as I understand it, and Jerry Mallett, who's not here, is the commissioner, and he's much more up on this than I am. But I believe it's still an open issue as to what DDOT's going to do with that intersection. And we have, I thought all along that 4-way stop was the solution, and I don't know why DDOT is resisting that. But nevertheless, we're still working with DDOT on that. And I don't think it's a closed issue at this point at all.
I can say something. Commissioner Mallett's been working with DDOT on this, and one of the first things they're going to do is get rid of the cars that park right next to the intersection, so there's going to be better sight lines when you're coming out of Chevy Chase Parkway. And I think that they're eliminating a number of spaces on Military Road. And I think that's going to happen in the next couple of months, if you want to know. problem with a stop sign on a street like Military Road. It's just gonna back up traffic like crazy.
Right, and I don't think they could put speed humps on that
No,
road because it's a military.
And not on Chevy Chase Parkway either, because I think that is a route for emergency.
It's classified as a certain road.
Yeah, it's classified in a way that you can't put speed humps on Chevy Chase Parkway because it can be used by fire trucks or police or whatever, ambulances. So I don't think you can do that.
And there are federal funds involved because I think it's a minor arterial street.
Yeah.
We may have to worry about federal rules as well as state city rules.
We got you off the hook.
Well, I was just going to say, this is a very informed ANC. Well done. That was very good.
Okay, anyone else with questions?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, those are good questions. Yes, sir.
Quick question. I know DC has probably the stronger energy assistance programs in the region. And the new budget, is there any extra money for energy assistance for local families?
Could you please speak up?
The question is there any additional funding for energy assistance for low-income families? We do have, something called LIHEAP, which is assistance to low-income families. And for the past 4 years, for the first time in maybe 10 or 20 years, we don't run out of money. That we get about $10 million from the federal government for it, and then the rest is local dollars. And we have fully funded it so that, you may remember, there used to be lines on October 1 when the fiscal year started for people to get their assistance, where the lines would wrap around the block. And we've not had a line in 4.5 years. So we fully funded that. And there's also energy assistance, as you know, includes gas for your natural gas. And now, of course, the utility burden is going to water dramatically. So now the city, because the only place DC Water can go is to the ratepayers. So the city's now bringing in tax dollars to help bring that down.
All right.
I do want to note, I really also appreciated the young woman from Center City Charter School. I mean, that gives us some reassurance that the next generation is ready to take on this fight. And so thank you for, it's always good to get out in the community, but these are the things that really make things worthwhile to me. Also want to acknowledge Matt Johnson, who is the brains behind figuring out how many nonprofits, how much funds, how far it'll go for the CREAC relief. Matt, thanks for being here, and thanks again to the ANC for your leadership.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Matt. I failed to acknowledge you. Anthony, do you have something?
Something quickly on the traffic safety assessment process. DDOT has recently, I'd say within the past 4 months, updated the process by which it fields requests for traffic calming. In the past, you had to get a petition from residents on the affected block, and it had to be more than half, and that got kind of dicey because getting the signatures, and if it was an intersection or a long corridor, it was hard to get all the signatures. Now they simply request that the resident who's asking for the traffic safety assessment complete what they're calling a traffic safety assessment questionnaire. And the questionnaire asks for a description of what the issues are, and the only thing it requires is the endorsement of the single-member district commissioner. So if I wanted something on my block, I would describe the issue, answer the questions prompted on the questionnaire, ask my single-member district representative to sign off on it, and send it away to DDOT. And that would kick off the process for them to study the area in question. So it's much simpler and much easier to send these requests their way. And if you do that, if you do choose to do that and you are a Ward 3 resident or Ward 4 resident, feel free to copy me or a member of Mary Chase staff or Councilmember Todd staff or the councilmember who represents the ward where the issue is.
Is DDOT going to do something to announce this? You haven't heard anything about it.
I don't know.
I
found it, right. I found out because I was going through or advising the resident using the old method and was pleasantly surprised to be corrected because this new method is so much easier. But here I am trying to get the word out.
Good, well, we appreciate it. Thank you. As always. We're going to miss you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is an issue that stems from a discussion that we had at our March 25th meeting. At that meeting, Brian Doyle was here and reported on some studies that have been done about the Wilson feeder schools and the prospects for the future and what the growth is going to be in our community. And in order to set this discussion up, I'm going to just summarize what we discussed at our meeting on the 25th. There was a Wilson feeder pattern community working group, and they issued a summary report on the current and projected overcrowding in schools that feed into Wilson High School. Based on the statistics that the working group compiled, schools in the Wilson feeder pattern are already at or above capacity. And projections in the master plan show that this overcrowding will get much worse over the next 10 years, with a projected 3,185 additional students over that period. That translates into an increase, or suggested increase in the need for 3 new elementary schools, 1 new middle school, and 1 new high school. And faced with these projections, the District of Columbia Public Schools Advisory Group has considered a number of possible solutions, including facilities meeting in shifts, the school would meet in shifts, longer school years, partnerships with UDC or with Duke Ellington School of the Arts to use using private facilities, even talking to people at Fannie Mae about the possible use of that site. Some schools are already having multiple lunch times to utilize cafeterias efficiently, and the halls are so crowded that students can't get through them to classes. The working group has pushed the district to take the next steps to add more schools. The public school has also indicated that it prefers to use publicly owned sites for any new schools. And that brings us to our discussion tonight, because the Old Hardy School at 1550 Foxhall Road is the only DCPS-owned property west of Rock Creek that is not currently being used for public education. The mayor has submitted emergency legislation to the council. It's called the Old Hardy School Disposition Lease Approval Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2019, which proposes entering a new long-term lease with the lab school, which currently has a lease at the site. Such a lease would effectively remove the Old Hardy School from consideration for a new public school. The proposed legislation represents that the Old Hardy School building needs continued investment, including capital investments, and in order to make those investments, the legislation represents the lab school requires a long-term lease. The legislation doesn't specify, however, what the terms of the lease would be. Councilmember Che and Ward 3, member of the State Board of Education, and as well as ANC 3D, have all written letters opposing this proposed bill. Because this is designated as emergency legislation too, even though the lab school lease doesn't expire until 2023, there would be no public hearing on the bill before the council. We've invited representatives from the lab school and from the study group that did the study about the Wilson Feeder School overcrowding to speak with us tonight, and we're going to talk first of all with the lab school. We'll hear from them, and then we'll hear from the people who are supporting use of the Old Hardy School in a different way. Catherine Schantz is the head of school at the lab school, and we're very, very happy to have you tonight. I want to first of all say what a great contribution the lab school makes to the District of Columbia, and we really do appreciate the impact that we've had on lots and lots of students over the years. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Speck, for the invitation to present this evening. Certainly this is an important piece of legislation for the lab school and its future. On February 28th, 2019 when Mayor Bowser introduced Bill 23-169, which was the old Hardy School Disposition and Lease Approval Act of 2019. It was meant to authorize the mayor, of course, to extend a long-term lease to Lab. Currently, Lab's lease expires in 2023. The legislation now requires, because we are not treating it as emergency legislation, but rather standard legislation, requires a public hearing before the Council's Business and Economic Development Committee. As of now, that hearing has not been scheduled. Then it will go to a committee markup and be voted out of committee. And then there will be 2 readings and votes by the full 13-member DC Council. So this will follow a regular process. That's important for people to know. You should also know that this is not the first time that we have gone through the legislative process. In 2013, we went through every step of the district's process for entering into a long-term lease that called for the surplus and disposition process. And after going through this long process, the legislation to approve the lease was pulled from consideration hours before the final vote. So we have been in this process of looking forward to a long-term lease for quite some time. And another relevant piece is that similar legislation to this bill, 23-169, was passed unanimously by the Council in 2018. In July, the Council voted to approve a new lease of the Jackson School on R Street, which is just about a mile from Lab. And ironically, while Lab serves district students, Jackson School does not. It serves an art community. Yet every single councilman supported it. So why is Lab asking for this lease? I think you mentioned some of the reasons why we're asking, but let me elaborate a little bit more. Lab has played a very important role in DC's public education system for 50 years, serving thousands of students whose needs could not be met by a traditional public school. We serve both students that are private pay, and we serve students who are funded by their jurisdictions, including DC. This population of students whose needs are established by the implementation of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, commonly known as IDEA, continue to need a school such as Lab that serves the students with language-based learning differences, commonly referred to as dyslexia, or reading disorders, or spelling and writing disorders. And the impact on these students who are intelligent but experience an unexpected inability to learn the alphabetic code of our language is significant. Research shows that the population is from 10 to 20% of our population. Research also shows that the first grade student who has dyslexia is very aware that they are not keeping up with their peers, and very quickly their self-esteem is affected, and if not given intensive and appropriate instruction, they suffer for years with this sense of inferiority. I know that Councilman Grasso is focusing on emotional needs of our city students. We should consider Lab as part of that solution. DC needs to be a leader in educating all minds. Most major cities have schools such as these that support public schools in educating the students that are much more difficult to teach, to read, and to be citizens that can reach the level of their potential. Today, Lab serves 140 DC students. That's about 40% of our population. That's Lab. And 40 of whom are funded by the district. I I know that there is a perception out there that Lab is a wealthy, independent school. Indeed, we are an independent school, but we're a hybrid. We also serve district students. And we simply are not a wealthy school. We do have a very high tuition. That's because our teacher-student ratio is about 1 teacher to 2.5 students. And that's what's required to make sure that these students are really successful. We have a substantial line in our budget for financial aid to make sure that the school is accessible to students without sufficient means to attend, should the district not fund it. Lab is located its elementary program in the old Hardy building since 2008, over a decade, when we took over the remaining years on the lease held by the Rock Creek International that went bankrupt. This building fits our needs to have a campus in proximity to our main campus. We share faculty and we share faculty and we share facilities. Old Hardy, in fact, does not have a gym or a cafeteria. The school's property is limited to the small footprint of its building and 2 small parking lots. The lease does not include the field. Since 2008, we have invested in modernizing the most critical elements of the infrastructure, the attic and the basement. The basement is a dirt basement. But there is more to be done to make the school ADA accessible, the windows functional, the HVAC accommodating to learning. It's currently quite loud, located above the students. We would like to be able to make these investments sooner rather than later, as they are impacting the learning and the accessibility to the building. We have pledged in our new LOI to invest $3 million in upgrades as part of our extended proposed lease. Forcing Lab out of the old Hardy building to address issues unrelated to special education in the district is very short-sighted in my mind.
Thank you very much. I have just a couple of questions. Of the 140 students, does that include both campuses?
That's both campuses.
So how many students are there at the Old Hardy School?
At Old Hardy School, there are 71 students, and 25 of those are district students. Anywhere from 35 to 40% of the students are district students in all divisions.
And there wasn't a specification in the legislation about the length of the lease. What are you thinking on that? Is it, how long does the long-term lease have to be?
We proposed a 25-year lease.
25-year lease. Commissioners, have questions?
Yeah. Yes. So you say that there's 71 students at Hardy. Does anybody know how many students were at Hardy when it was public school? But 71 students, maybe 2 or 3 classes in a regular public school.
Maybe some of our other, I think some of our others.
Yeah, so there were, when it was a public school, there were over 200 kids there. And it is the same design as the other DCPS schools. Key, Stoddard, Man, Murch, Lafayette, and Shepherd. The smallest attendance in any of those schools is 379 currently, and the average is over 1,000.
Just to follow up on that, I'm assuming, I'm Commissioner Garfield, I apologize for being here late at another event, but I have been reading about your school. So is it a more specialized program? Are your classes smaller in size, say 10 students or less? You maybe use more classrooms? How does it work? What is your average class size?
So our average class size is anywhere from 8 to 12.
Okay.
And we have, in a class of 12, we would have 2 to 3 adults because much of the education is very intensive and requires much more attention to
Okay, so you are spread out throughout the school.
We use every inch of the building.
And then, aside from the classroom space, do you use other spaces, say either for counseling or any other aspects? Because I guess what I'm really trying to get at is, in terms of the specialized use of your school, what are the other things that you do that we may not, in the community, may not know about?
Right, so we have occupational therapists and speech and language therapists and social workers and psychologists that are embedded in the daily routine of the students. So they need offices and space as well. So, and we have a very intensive arts program. As we're an arts-based school, have found that to be very successful with students with learning disabilities, with language learning disabilities. So.
Okay, to follow up on that, you said you're in the intensive art space. What type of arts program? Is it more using like defined motor skills in terms of painting, or is it other types of art, through dance, or?
Well, it's all of that. We call it the visual arts program and the performing arts program, and we try to give students a course in visual arts and a course in performing arts, because they take 2 arts a day in the elementary building.
And are you currently at capacity, or do you have the ability to take additional students?
We have ability to take more students. We've had up to 90 students in that building. So I think the occupancy is 200 there for a traditional classroom setting, but when you have an intensive program such as this, you need more space to deliver services.
Another question, what's your fallback position if you do not get renewed in Hardy?
At the moment, we don't have a fallback solution. We really, this building has worked out extremely well for us, and as you know, there's not a lot of empty space in Ward 3, and so this is, we are most hopeful that we will be able to remain in this building. Thank you.
Okay, let's hear from our other speakers.
Hi, I'm Ruth Battenberg. I'm the Ward 3 State Board of Ed rep, and as was mentioned, I'm one of the people that has sent the letter.
Would you talk
And I'm going to start over.
because we're recording it.
Oh, okay. All right, can I? And I'm here as part of the team, so I'm going to sort of start us off and have Nick and Karen, who may also get into it. Nick is the master of the details and the facts on this. But let me say this. First of all, I totally appreciate what Captain Chance was saying about the need for support in reading. I come out of an education world. That's what I did. I worked on education. I edited magazines. It is terrifically important that kids get this background. We're trying to get more of it into the DC schools. There will always be a need for places like Lab, and Lab does a great job. None of this is about that. It's about the space. It's about using, as you have pointed out, using 3,000 additional kids in the Wilson feeder pattern schools within 8 years, and it goes, it's a straight line up, so within 5 years it's going to be 1,500 new kids. It's simply not viable at all for these kids to go to the physical plants that now exist. And it is fiscally irresponsible for DCPS, for the city, to say we're going to go build new buildings when there is a DCPS property right here to use. So that's the issue, is we need to have a building that can be fairly easily expanded to handle 400, 500 kids. As Nick said, that's what this footprint of school is capable of doing with a renovation and an expansion. So that needs to happen to take care of a good portion of the need. Lab needs a place, and I'm very sympathetic to Lab needing a place. What upsets me terribly about this whole situation
is this has been a known problem for a while. This has been a challenge for a while. And instead of the city trying to work with lab to try to find another place where lab can go, and let me just say, in the last few years, GDS has given up a school property in Palisades. St. Pat's, I believe, has just left. Other buildings are coming on the market there, I know. And DC, instead of working to help lab find a new place, has given lab the hope and expectation that it could just keep fighting this back. And that is not fair. It was the wrong strategy of the city. And pushes down from the shove, so to speak. The city really needs to be able to take that over in 4 years for DCPS, which creates a lead time for transition. Nobody's being thrown out. I want to be really clear about that. And it's imperative that the city should work with with lab to make the transition, find a place. I know the ANC in Palisades has also expressed a great deal of willingness to work with them. So that's the gist.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll stay here for another day or so.
Thanks. So my name is Nick Keenan, and I'm part of the Keep Old Hardy Public Coalition. I'm the past president of the Palisades Citizens Association. I was on the LSAT at Key School. I have 3 boys. They all went through 7 years of Key School each. And I want to talk first just a little bit about the history of this building. It was built in 1932, and at that time, 8 schools were built that were all the same design. And it was the Old Hardy School, Key, Stoddard, Mann, Murch, Lafayette, Shepherd. And in 1972, it was converted from an elementary school to a middle school. Amy Carter went there when her dad was president. And then in 1996, it was moved, the Hardy Middle School was moved to its current location into a bigger building. And this building was closed. At that time, the control board wanted to sell the building. And council members Kathy Patterson and Jack Evans blocked the control board from selling the building because they said, we should save it for the future when we're going to need it as a DCPS school. And the short story is that the future is now. And so they insisted that it be leased in a series of short-term leases, which has been the status for the past 20 years. In 2013, there was the attempt at the lease extension. The reason that that lease was pulled back at the last minute was that DCPS, as sort of the final step of the lease approval, DCPS was asked to certify that they had no need for the building. And they would not do that. And that was in 2013. And that has been the story ever since, is that there's a reason why this lease has never been extended. It's because the building is needed. In the past 10 years, the city has added 22,000 students. It's projected to add 25,000 students in the next 10 years. I know you've heard all this from Brian. This building, I know Ms. Shantz tried to characterize it as, oh, it's small and old and not usable. It's the same building, same base building as a whole bunch of other schools that are currently being used as DCPS schools. And I have statistics about them. I'm just going to go to my phone to get them. That the smallest of those is Noyes, is 379 kids currently. And the average capacity of the schools that were all built at the same time on the same pattern is 523 students. This school actually has more potential for expansion because it abuts a DPR site, and the footprint of the school plus the DPR site is almost 6 acres of publicly owned land. It is one of the largest contiguous pieces of DC-owned land anywhere in Ward 3. There are many places where DCPS co-locates with DPR. So it's not a stretch to say that DCPS could co-locate in here and put in a school of 400, 500 kids. Ms. Shantz made the point that roughly 10% of the population has some sort of trouble learning. It's actually higher in DCPS, it's around 14%. Far more DC kids would be served, DC kids with learning difficulties would be served if this were a DCPS school than the way it's currently being used, when there's only 71 kids total in the building and 2/3 of them aren't from DC. One of the things I want to point out is that while the lab school is a great school, this is just a small satellite campus, and that the lab school existed for 40 years. Without this campus, they will be able to exist if they lose this campus. It'll be better used by DCPS. They have been there since 2008. They've never had more than a 5-year lease. They voluntarily and knowingly entered into 2 5-year leases and then a 3rd one last year, knowing that at any time the building could be taken back by DCPS. And particularly after 2013, they have known all along that DCPS will need this building. I want to correct one of the things that there was a question about the length of the lease, and the current lease has not been made public yet, but in the past iterations, it was a 25-year lease, but it had a 25-year lease, it had a 25-year option for renewal that was only an option for the school. There was no city option not to renew the lease, and so effectively, the city is yielding control of the property for 50 years. From my perspective, and I think for almost everyone here, 50 years is effectively forever. I think I've hit all my points. So thank you.
Can I interrupt you with a question?
Yes.
The Kingsbury School,
Yeah.
we're just pulling it up. It's closing down and they're going to sell it? I don't understand. Have you guys looked at different possibilities? Can that one be renovated for the lab school or for a public school? Or why is that one being sold? Have you explored other places besides just concentrating on the lab school, I guess? Property is what I'm asking.
Right, I'm asking the lab school.
That kind of raises a point, which is that DCPS is a neighborhood-based school system, and the schools need to be where the need for students is. Lab is a school that serves the entire metropolitan region.
No, I understand that. But have you worked with Lab about maybe having the city or somebody renovate Kingsbury for the lab school to go back there?
I think there's a purchase agreement with,
I can't hear.
I think there's a purchase agreement with Lamb Public Charter School.
There's a what?
For St. Lamb Public Charter School.
Oh, the Latin American Public Charter School?
They have a deal to purchase that property.
Oh.
No, they have a deal to purchase the old Kingsbury School.
Which means that they're moving from their old building on Military Road,
Correct. They want to consolidate 3 campuses there.
and so their old building will be empty as well, the Lamb School.
I'm not certain.
I just want, the point is exactly right. Buildings come on the market, and there
Right.
needs to be an effort on the part of the city, along with Lab, to find a really appropriate place. And the point is, things come up, and that effort isn't being made, and it needs to be made.
But then also, just to play devil's advocate on the flip side, I mean, you're saying that the city should work with Lab to find another place for Lab. What about other sites that the city currently has? We have a huge Ward 3 and Ward 4. I know your committee is focusing mainly on Ward 3, but what about other sites within that for the school to look at as opposed to that particular property that Lab is currently leasing?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, DCP, the city, is not a free agent as a person to go out and lease in the same way that a private school is. DCPS is much more limited in what it should be the most fiscally responsible and legally feasible thing to do is for it to make use of its existing facilities.
Right. So I understand that, but one of my questions is, I know that the city, for instance, I also go to charter school, and I know that empty properties within the city, public school buildings that aren't used, have basically charter schools have been given, say, the first option to lease those buildings. So what about those buildings in terms of, you know, student overpopulation or creating a new school for student use? I'm just
So that's a good point, and I would have no objection to the city helping the lab school, you know, however they want to solve their facilities problems. The point about the charter schools having right of first refusal does bring up an interesting point, which is that Ms. Shantz had said earlier that this is being done through the normal process, and that's not actually true. The city law says that before a DC public school property can be disposed of, and a long-term lease is considered disposal, it has to go through a public surplusing process. The legislation that is before the council right now seeks to bypass that process, okay? The second part is that once it goes through that public surplus process, it has to be offered to a charter school first before anyone else. And there has to be a bidding process, okay? Both of those processes are being bypassed by this legislation. And it's important that Lab is a great school, but they are a private school. They are a private entity. They are not a public school. They are not a public charter school. It is not normal to be bypassing the normal process of dealing with city property.
The city just did it. So less than 12 months ago, there was a school.
Could you go to the mic?
And then maybe the mayor's office could also respond to some of the issues, if you have any information
I
as
want
well.
to address this point about, first I just
Right.
want to introduce myself. My name is Ben Young, and for 2 years I've held lab with this lease. I am a resident of this ANC. I live at 2900 McKinley Street. I have 2 boys at Lafayette. So life on the LSAT, whole 9 yards. So less than 12 months ago, the city disposed of and leased a property called the Jackson School to an adult arts program for essentially retirees. It has no connection whatsoever to the public school system. You Google map it, it's 1.2 miles away from the old Hardy School. So, you know, here we have a situation where you had the legislation, there was an emergency bill, there was a permanent bill, there was a council hearing, it passed 13 to nothing. And so you have to ask yourself, how is it that less than a year ago, 10 months ago, the council approved a school to dispose of with no relationship to the public school system, and yet here's Lab, going back to the days of Blackman Jones, when the parents had to pull together and collectively file a class action lawsuit against the city because the city would not process the request. And at last, the city, essentially the city's special education system was under receivership for 20 years. We just got out from under it, but we're still on what's called I think it's called a watch list or something like that by IDA partner. And so special education is something this city still does not do well. Right. By way of background, I worked at the council for 10 years. I was the chief of staff to the chairman of the education committee. I helped write the law which governs the disposal of schools. And so to even get into that process, the school system has already decided that the school is no longer needed for a public purpose. So before the deputy mayor even enters the process, there's been a decision made that the school is not needed for DCPS. So it is true, the school was disposed of, surplus by the control board in 1997. There was a 25-year lease. It was not a series of small leases.
That's not true.
It is.
It was 10 years.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt you.
Please don't interrupt.
It was a 10-year lease and 3 5-year options, all at the sole option of the tenant. And the reason they did that was because the rent reset to market rate after 10 years, and after 5 years, after 5 years, after 5 years. They wanted the rent to reset. So that was the reason you had this sort of 10-year, 3 5-year option lease. That lease expires in 2023. In 2013, the lab went through what I like to call the 99-step surplus and disposition process. It was pulled the night before the vote, and the reason it was pulled was because the city was getting ready to go through the school boundaries process. It was the first time we've done it in 40 years, probably won't do it for another 40. It was a painful process, I've lived it, and hope to never do that again. The original proposal in the school boundaries process, the original draft plan, would have shrunk Key Elementary School's boundary, which is the closest elementary school to the old Hardy School and to the lab school. Would have shrunk, it was in the Foxhall Village to High-Madison and Foxhall Crescent to Man, I believe. What happened is, and so just, if you recall, we stopped the process because we said we want to go through the school boundaries process to see if there's a need for the building. We think that's a responsible thing to do. If not, then we'll come back to it. The parents of Key, I mean, it's agree or disagree, it's in the notes right there, went and argued that Key was in fact not overcrowded. And when you counted the amount of votes, it was not overcrowded, therefore don't change the boundary. And that's what happened in the final say. So what happened, because we had been through the school boundaries process, the council came back to this issue in 2016 and passed an emergency bill that was passed at 11-2 to authorize the lease that was originally proposed for lab and that they had gone through the normal process for. What happened along the way, there's been lots of curves along the way. What happened is the mayor and the council, to use the technical term, were fussing over some properties in Southeast about who had the right to dispose of them, the council or the mayor. Council said it did, the mayor said disposal of properties is a mayoral function. The lab school issue got caught up, even though the mayor supported the bill. The lab school got caught up in that food fight between the mayor and the council. So what the mayor did is said, I'm not going to sign.
Break this up. We're running short of time. We're supposed to close it.
I'll wrap up in a minute.
Well, I'm going to have to make a suggestion after I hear from you.
The mayor said, I'll send it down under my name. I support it. And then that's where we are today. So the mayor, the last council period, sent down the legislation. In this council period, she sent it down again. And so that's essentially what. Now you may ask yourself, is it common to lease property to private schools? I worked in the district for a long time. We lease, ironically enough, the city owns the property underneath St. John's High School. The city owns all 14 acres of that. We lease to union halls. The city owns the Dean of DeLuca and Georgetown. We lease for all kinds of purposes. This is not abnormal. In terms of term, nearly every charter school lease that comes through now is a 50-year term. That's this isn't unusual. So I'll leave it there. But I want to give a few more details on our perspective on this.
Well, thank you.
I'm going to suggest something because it's clear. I mean, we're at 9 o'clock already. We're supposed to end at 9 o'clock. We've got a number of other things left on our agenda too. One thing that's developed tonight that we didn't know previously was that this is not going to be treated as emergency legislation. That there's going to be a hearing on it, there's going to be testimony taken, there's going to be an opportunity for the public to weigh in. My suggestion to the commission now is, and especially since we're 2 commissioners short now, is that we wait until the hearing comes up and that we submit testimony at that point rather than a resolution now. At a point when I think we still all want to learn more, and we're not ready, I think, at this point to say one way or the other how this ought to come out. But I would propose that we postpone this discussion, wait until the committee sets a date for a hearing, and then prepare testimony, perhaps, making a recommendation to the council for what happens. Now, I do think that this has an effect. It's not just on the immediate area around the old public schools. This has ramifications really for the whole area because we're all growing. Lafayette School is already just 2 years after modernization, and it's already bursting at the seams. This is something that the district has to deal with, and I don't think we've dealt with it very well in the past. And there is some time now before the lease expires in 4 years where we ought to be thinking about this dispassionately and carefully and thoughtfully from every standpoint. And so, is that something the commission would like to do? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's what we're going to do then. So this is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of the discussion. It's not the beginning of the discussion either, because we've already had one long discussion at our meeting on the 25th, March 25th. So hopefully we're going to have all of you back again to talk about this, but we're going to revisit this at a later point. And it was very heartening to me to hear that the council is actually going to hold a hearing on this, and it's not going to be treated as emergency legislation, which I think is the right thing to do. Okay. Thank you all for coming out. It was very helpful, very informative, and we appreciate it very much. Okay, the next item we have on the agenda is to take up some of the, at least one of the liquor license renewals that we didn't do before. Is Bill here? Bill, okay. You missed our earlier discussion on a number of other, yeah. Basically, what we need from you is just a brief background on whether there are going to be any changes to the application for the renewal, is basically continuing the current processes that are in place, and then whether there are any questions.
Okay. So I'm Bill Updorf, I'm Executive Director at the Avalon. I do appreciate your working around your agenda. I just came from the Avalon board meeting, so that's why I couldn't get here earlier. As to your question about the Avalon's plans, we have no changes planned at all to our liquor license. I think we're approved for hours up to 1 a.m. and we usually close the theater a half hour after the last show goes in, it's about 8:30. So we have no plans to change anything related to the way we operate that part of the business.
Okay. Any questions from commissioners or the audience? Well, the Avalon is really an institution that we're extremely proud of in the neighborhood. We appreciate the cafe too. Frequently have meetings there.
Yes.
And
seen
so
there many times.
It's a wonderful asset in our community, and we really appreciate having the Avalon there. So I would move that we support the application for renewal of the liquor license for the Avalon Theater. All those in favor? 5-0. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, for coming in. Okay, briefly, Chris, you want to give an update on the modernization of the community center from the design standpoint?
Yeah, this isn't going to take long. I spoke to George Lewis, who is the procurement director for DGS this morning, and they are presently negotiating with 4 bidders. And he said by the end of next week, the latest, there'll be a selection. So looks like we're finally moving ahead. Of course, I'll believe it when I see it. But that's it.
Yeah, I've got on the construction side. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment about the modernization. So I'm a 20-year resident of the state. I do not get to make comments about the old Hardy School. Could you please go to the mic? Sure. I'm Karen Perkins. I've lived at 39th Street and Military Road for the last 20 years, and I will look forward to continuing the conversation about the old Hardy School. But related to, and as this ANC considers the modernization of the design phase for the community center, and perhaps eventually the library renovation as they're going through their master facilities planning process, I think it's really, really important to keep an eye to how we can incorporate potentially flexible education space in this campus. There is virtually no flexible public space in Ward 3 that can be expanded to accommodate our growing educational needs. And I think it's going to be really, really important to think about how we can work that into this recreation center and library campus as we move forward.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why we want to totally renovate or actually get a new building, because this building's not flexible at all, whereas a new building will be more modular and hopefully will have movable partitions so that different size spaces and different kinds of activities can take place, because you know, in 10 years from now, the kind of activities that happen here will probably be quite different than they are when the building is built. So that'll be part of the charge. And we're, I'm leading a committee that's going to oversee the design of the community center. I'm an architect. I've been an architect for 45 years. You know, we'll have public meetings, and so if you're interested, you know, you can contact me if you want to be a permanent member of the committee. You'd be welcome to.
I mean, I will mention too that the library held a meeting on April 25th to talk about its future and how it would integrate with the work that's being done on modernization of the community center. One of the things that came out of that was a strong desire, I think, on the part of the library to share as many facilities as possible, to make sure we don't duplicate facilities. One of the things that came out was a need for some physical connection between the two buildings, so that you know, if there's rain or something like that, you can go from one building to the other, and really utilize the whole campus here as an integrated unit. And I think that would give us a lot more flexibility as well. And the library was very enthusiastic about doing that. So I think there are opportunities as we go through this design process to really ensure that we do make it as flexible as possible. I'll just report briefly too on the other aspect. Chris is heading the design task force, and I'm heading the construction task force. The construction really means what's going to happen during construction, and what's going to happen with parking in the neighborhood, what's going to happen with traffic, how's all that going to be controlled. And there was a suggestion at our meeting on April 25th that we talked with some of the other ANCs who've had similar experience. And so I met with Nancy McWood, who is the chair of ANC 3C, and she is also has a single member district that includes the Cleveland Park Library. So I talked to her about what had happened there, how they worked with DGS in that process, worked with the contractor, and a lot of the problems that she identified were similar to ones that we've had, for instance, with 5333 Connecticut or with Ingleside in their expansion. But their parking, traffic, use of public space, particularly with things like dumpsters and deliveries and things like that, because it's right in the middle of a commercial area as well as a residential area. So we've got both the commercial area and the residential area. So it really requires a lot of very careful planning. And I've already had preliminary discussions with DGS about doing something like that. So we're going to continue to work with DGS to see if we can't reach an agreement on what's going to happen during the construction to minimize the impact on the community. That's going to be a really important thing. Okay, that's the report on the community. Any other questions? Okay, the last thing I mentioned when we modified the agenda at the beginning was the possible vote on the resolution urging the council to hold hearings on any proposed changes to the District's Freedom of Information Act. This is also something that's come up at the last moment. I assume it's going to still be in the, I haven't checked what Mendelson file. What is out? Okay. All right. Okay, we no longer have to deal with this. All right. So we can go to this. Yeah. That's great. Okay. I guess the intellectual side of the council prevailed. Okay. The minutes for our April 22nd meeting. Is there any modification or change to the minutes that have been posted on our website or the Chevy Chase listserv and other places? All those in favor of adopting the minutes? Ayes are. Okay, checks.
Here first, just a little, is 131.43 on the.
Whatever it is.
Yes, that's the amount. Because I think on another one.
Oh, this is the net amount.
Yes. Okay.
Verizon.
Yes. 131.
notation is slightly different, so we'll,
That's the net amount due.
okay, 130, 143.
Right, that's what the check is for.
Yes, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll figure that. And then, a note from Alan, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the DC government allotment on May 6th, 2019 of this year for $3,997.96. Yes. Through.
And is that, which quarter is that for? Second quarter?
That's the first one.
First quarter? First quarter.
First quarter of this fiscal year.
Yeah.
Payroll?
No.
No.
All right, then we are all set.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All those in favor of approving the check to Verizon for $131.43? 5-0.
Did we have a bill from our website? We have a bill from our website. Did we have a bill from
Yes. I have not yet. I didn't hear back. We'll do this.
Okay, items for our June 10th meeting. I'm sure other things are going to come up between now and then, but the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, DCRA, has asked to make a presentation on the agency's enforcement and consumer protection enhancements. And so they will have a little bit of time on the agenda. And then we have a special exception for an application at 3615 Military Road to extend the existing bump out that currently encroaches into the required side yard setback of 4 feet. So those are the only two things I have right now. Anybody else have anything else?
I do have a slight correction.
Yep.
140. So we have that on record, because I read the wrong number out.
141, 43 for Verizon. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, we still vote. Everybody still approves that.
Minor, but being technical, you know,
Gotta get it right.
the district will come back and view our tapes and papers.
Right. Okay, any other items that need to be on the agenda for June 10th? Or maybe some other things related to...
Yes.
Yes.
Potentially,
We should put that on here.
yes, there will be an issue that we have been dealing with in my part of the district on Moreland Street. Just to keep it short, it's dealing with a private lease contract that is not a group home and it's not a halfway house. However, it is termed as a self-help, self-recovery home. And there were some issues that were raised by neighbors. And today I had a meeting with Councilmember Todd, and he had spoken with 2 agencies, or actually 3. The DCRA, which deals with the zoning issue, the Department of Behavioral Health, and the Office of the Attorney General. So according to his office, they're going to be putting out a letter on this issue, but a number of residents raised questions and concerns. So the ANC believes that June 10th would be a great time to discuss this issue.
How many people live in the house?
At this point, there are 2 homes on Moreland Street.
How many people
We,
live
at
in
this
it?
point, do not know. There is an occupancy limitation currently zoning of 6 individuals.
That's what it says.
However, yes, there are other issues related to that, which we will bring out to the community, and you have more detail on at that meeting. But we want to make sure that the citizens are aware of what the law is around it, what the private citizens' rights are, and what our community rights are too.
We've had these before.
Yeah. Okay, and I will not be at the June 10th meeting. I will be out of town. Chris will be chairing that meeting. As far as I know, yes. Well, I'm not sure Dan's going to be back. I don't know whether Dan will be back. Okay, with that, we adjourn at 9:15. Thank you.
Make sure you get the checks to